European airport, the hum of conversation blends with rolling suitcases and distant announcements. A man walks at a measured pace, eyes scanning the space as if the air itself might shift. He carries a small backpack. His passport rests in his hand. He pauses outside a medical room, exchanges a few quiet words with the doctor, and listens. Then, in an instant that will live online forever, he bolts. He runs the length of the terminal, bursts through the doors into the heat, abandons everything he brought with him, climbs a fence, and vanishes into the open land beyond. His name is Lars Mittank. In 2014, he left a trail of security footage, a wake of questions, and a mystery that refuses to fade. Before that sprint, Lars was simply Lars, 28 years old, an engineer, healthy, even-tempered. He lived in a small German town, close to his mother, Sandra, and loyal to a circle of friends who knew him as steady, sensible, and kind. On weekends, he watched soccer, rooting for Werder Bremen with the devotion that turns routines into rituals. He had plans that were ordinary and comforting. Work, save, travel a little, return to work, move ahead. The contours of his life were familiar and solid, a shape that promised more of the same. In early July, he traveled with friends to Golden Sands, a resort on Bulgaria's Black Sea coast. It was the kind of trip European 20-somethings know by heart. Long days under bright sun, inexpensive bars crowded with music, beaches that glow at twilight. At first, everything was light. They swam, they laughed, they planned the next evening as the current one ended, and yet people close to Lars would later describe a quiet drift occurring beneath the surface, moments when his expression grew distant, when his answers arrived a beat too late, when his gaze tracked an empty doorway as if waiting for someone to step through. On one of their last nights, the friends went to a bar popular with locals. A game was on. The air was tight with noise and heat, and a routine exchange about soccer, such as who would finish higher in the league, tilted without warning into friction. Words sharpened. Voices rose. In the space where misunderstandings bloom, a scuffle started. It ended quickly, but not before Lars took a blow to the left side of his head. Later, a doctor diagnosed a ruptured eardrum. He was told to rest and advised not to fly for several days. The pressure changes of a plane could turn pain into damage. His friends, bound to their return tickets, headed home. Lars stayed behind, saying he would follow. Across the next 48 hours, his calls to his mother carried a new cadence. Clipped, wary, urgent. He said men were watching him. He believed he was in danger. He switched hotels because the first one felt unsafe. Staff at the new place would recall a guest who seemed coiled tight, walking the hall, checking the window, pausing at the door as if a sound were coming from the other side. He slept little, ate less, and told his mother he could hear things he couldn't explain. She tried to soothe him over speakerphone, speaking the way only a mother can, slowly, with belief, reminding him that planning his trip home was the only thing that mattered now. On the morning of July 8th, he set out for Varna Airport. He wore a yellow t-shirt and jeans, a combination that would become part of the iconography of his case. Security footage shows him entering the terminal with an almost meditative calm, as if the decision to go home had pressed a hand over his spiraling thoughts. He visited the airport clinic. He spoke with the doctor on duty. He seemed, in those first seconds, to be doing exactly what anyone would do, seeking clearance to fly, seeking the official stamp that could carry him over the distance back to certainty. Then his body told a different story. He touched his head as if something had landed on it, as if a sound had pierced him. He stood. He moved with the kind of speed that does not wait for questions. The footage captures a run that is all instinct, the sprint of someone convinced that staying still would mean surrendering to a danger no one else could see. Passengers turn. A staff member glances up. He hits the doors, drops what he has, and sprints toward the perimeter. A fence rises, 2 meters of wire. He climbs. In the next frame, there is only light and scrub, and the long, indifferent line of the horizon. Police responded quickly. Search teams walked grid patterns through the brush. Dogs were brought to follow what little scent the summer heat had spared. Helicopters traced slow spirals in the sky, their shadows crossing fields and service roads. Volunteers from the area joined in. They combed ditches. They checked abandoned structures. They looked for clothing, paper, a phone, a fragment of anything. The search returned nothing. The quiet that followed was not clean. It was heavy, like ash, like unanswered questions settling over a place where something had happened and left no footprint. In the absence of evidence, narrative rushes in. One theory centers on a psychological collapse. It draws a line connecting trauma, pain, medication, and stress into a chain that can pull almost anyone into a crisis. A ruptured eardrum can be punishingly painful. Antibiotic side effects can be rare but profound. Insomnia amplifies fear. Being alone in a foreign place magnifies every small uncertainty into something that looks like a threat. According to this reading, the airport sprint was the end point of an acute episode. The world narrowed to a single command: run. Another theory points outward instead of inward. Criminal involvement. Popular tourist zones can hold shadows at their edges. Opportunists who scan crowds for people who are disoriented, who are separated from friends, who are injured or drug-addled or simply unlucky. If someone had targeted Lars, the feeling of being watched would not have been a delusion. It would have been an accurate read of danger. In this version, the airport clinic becomes a tipping point. Something, perhaps a phone call, a glimpse of a face, convinces him that his safety is measured in meters and seconds, that only a full sprint buys time. More speculative branches extend into by conspiracy, suggestions that he stumbled into knowledge that belonged to someone else, that he overheard a fragment of a conversation, that he saw something mundane that took on a different meaning in the wrong context. Some invoke organized crime. Others whisper about trafficking or corruption that blooms wherever cash moves fast and quietly. These stories rarely come with proof. Still, people return to them because they fill the void with shape and motive, because they offer the comfort of agency, that there was a reason, and reasons can be fought. The most austere explanation is the me accident theory. It asks us to imagine a man in terror, running headlong into rough terrain. Sun beats down, thorn and branch claw. He trips, he falls, he rises. He walks until exhaustion dilutes fear into confusion. The countryside is larger than it looks from a camera mounted on a ceiling. People disappear in open places when dehydration closes a fist around their focus. If he collapsed unseen, the summer could have lifted the faintest remains before anyone arrived. It is a theory of sad physics. Time, heat, distance. None of these answers satisfy everyone. If the collapse was psychological, why did searches find nothing? If criminals were involved, why has no one come forward, even anonymously, even for money? If an accident took him, why did it leave not a single trace? The case became less a question and more a mirror. People looked into it and saw reflected back their fears, that the mind can break without warning, that safety is a function of chance, that bad luck can masquerade as design. Meanwhile, the search did not end at the perimeter fence. It followed the quiet pathways of the internet, forums where strangers take up complex puzzles, channels where video essays break down timeline and footage, threads that stretch for years as people offer leads, tips, and encouragement. Age-progressed images circulated, simulating how he might look now. Tips emerged from far-off cities and were checked, logged, and set aside. Some were sincere mistakes. Some were hoaxes. Each one pulled at the fabric of attention, and each one, when it failed to hold, left the mystery intact. At the center of that attention is a mother who refused to let silence harden into acceptance. Varna Mittank kept speaking, kept asking, kept believing that the next call, the next sighting, the next detail might be the one that breaks a stalemate. There is a specific gravity to a mother's voice in cases like this. It can lift an old story back into the news cycle. It can place a photo into the corner of a screen where it sits and watches the world watch back. Over time, her appeals wore the sheen off the spectacle and revealed the simple thing beneath, a family wanting to know if the person they love is alive. Years have a way of rounding off edges. They soften outrage, but they sharpen questions. What exactly happened in that clinic? Was there a sound, a word, a face? Did something external spark panic? Or did fear assemble itself from within, piece by piece, until there was no room left for anything else? We know the outline. A vacation, a fight, an injury, a series of anxious calls, a morning at the airport, a sudden run, a vanishing. The interior of that outline remains locked, not because it's unknowable, but because the person who holds it has not been found. The footage of the sprint endures as a cultural artifact. People watch it not only for the promise of a clue, but for what it evokes, the rawness of unmediated fear. In an age when so much is scripted, a man running without a line to deliver feels like a tear in the fabric. Viewers project themselves into his movement and ask a private question. What would make me run like that? That question works backward too. It forces us to reckon with how thin the surface of normal life can be, how a few days of pain and fear can unknot habits, how the mind's compass can lose north. There are cases that resolve with an explanation neat enough to end debate, and there are cases that become parables. This story belongs to the latter category. It is invoked when people discuss travel safety, mental health, the limits of medicine, the ethics of online sleuthing, and the gap between what authorities can do and what communities will attempt when the former yields no answers. It is used as a cautionary tale about the consequences of combining injury, medication, isolation, and stress. It is also a reminder that we should be careful with our certainty, that the borders between causes and effects are not always clear. Even in mystery, certain truths hold. People are more resilient than they think, and more fragile than they know. Fear is both a signal and a distortion. Crowds can hide danger and provide salvation. A fence can be a barrier and a ladder. Airports are built to move us along clean lines, but the human stories traveling through them are rarely linear. Lars arrived at one seeking permission to go home. The world has been waiting ever since for him to finish the journey he began that morning. From time to time, the story surges again. An article revisits the timeline. A television segment retells the details. A new witness recalls a face that might have been his. Each surge returns to the same pivotal scene. The quiet in the clinic, the shift in his posture, the decision to move, the sprint, the air outside, the fence, the field. The repetition is not gratuitous. It is ritual. It is the way people keep an unsolved story alive long enough for a solution to find it. What would resolution look like? For some, it would be forensic, a confirmation that he succumbed to the elements, that a tragic accident ended the search before it began. For others, it would be narrative, an explanation that restores cause and effect, that points to a reason with the finality of a period. For his mother, it might be a single phone call. For the thousands who learned his name from a blurry video still, it might be only this: the knowledge that uncertainty does not last forever, that even the most stubborn mysteries yield to time or truth. Until then, the questions remain where they have always been, on the edge of an airport map, in the pixelated grain of security footage, in the space between fear and safety where a person decides to run. They hover in the mind whenever a story ends without an ending. They live in the tension between the world we can measure and the world we can feel. They make us consider how easily we could cross that line ourselves. Lars Mittank left behind objects that can be catalogued and a silence that cannot. He left behind an image of a run that has been watched millions of times. A sequence so ordinary and so strange that it feels like a dream you can't entirely wake from. He left behind a mother who continues to search, friends who replay conversations for clues, and strangers who carry his name as a shorthand for the part of life that resists explanation. If you believe the mind is the last frontier, his case is a story about navigation without a compass. If you believe the world hides dangers within its bright places, his case is a map of what can go wrong when chance chooses a target. If you believe most mysteries are ultimately solvable, his case is a challenge, a reminder that evidence is not guaranteed by effort, that answers are not owed to those who ask. Some stories close with a return home. This one pauses at a fence and looks outward. Somewhere beyond that line, the trail went cold. Somewhere beyond that line, a man either found what he feared or lost it. The land holds its secrets. The footage holds its frames. The rest is a field of possibilities. Sometimes the mystery lies not in what happened, but in why it happened the way it did, in the mechanisms of fear, in the chemistry of pain, in the pressures that shape a choice at the speed of a heartbeat. The last clear thing we know is a run. Everything after that is inference, hope, and the stubborn work of people who refuse to let a name become a footnote. If you have your own answer, hold it lightly. The story has resisted others before, and if you have only questions, you are not alone. They are the honest inheritance of anyone who looks at the footage and feels the pull of the unknown. They are a sign that even in a world mapped by satellites and cameras, there are moments that slip between the grids and walk away. Which theory feels most likely to you? What detail do you return to when you try to make sense of it? The ear injury, the phone calls, the clinic door, the sprint, the fence. If you carry a different answer tomorrow than you do today, that's not failure. That's the shape of uncertainty. It bends, it breathes, it waits. Sometimes, the only true ending a story like this can offer is the reminder that a person once lived at its center, that he laughed and worked and called his mother, and took a trip with friends to a seaside town, and walked into an airport, and ran, that somewhere, someone knows more than the camera does, and that until those words are spoken, the mystery of Lars Mittank will keep moving, quietly, steadily, inside the minds of everyone who has ever watched him disappear into the summer light.